Heaven a big news.
Hi, I'm Blake Lively, and I'm going to be taking the BuzzFeed quiz, which iconic Blake Lively character.
Lars Harry opens by thanking her, and there's a genuine warmth in the exchange right from the start, the kind that doesn't feel rehearsed or transactional. He admits he's been following her coverage closely, that he's been a fan for a while, and there's a sense that even he's a little surprised by how suddenly she seemed to appear everywhere in the conversation surrounding the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni case. He asks the obvious question, the one everyone watching has wondered at some point: was this her first real step into social media commentary, or had she been doing this quietly for years before the algorithm finally caught up with her? Her answer is almost funny in how absolute it is. In every sense of the word, yes, it was her first foray. She explains that she's one of those rare people who never had a Facebook account, not even briefly, not even during the era when everyone felt pressured to have one just to exist socially. Instagram exists for her, but only barely. A tiny circle of around 60 people made up of family and friends, the kind of account where the biggest update is a photo of her kid doing something ordinary, nothing curated, nothing public-facing. Twitter was there too, technically, but she never tweeted, not once. No audience, no persona, no brand. Social media simply wasn't part of her life. What she did do, though, was lurk. For years. TikTok in particular pulled her in, not as a creator but as an observer. She liked how the For You page worked, how it seemed to find the right people and the right content without effort, how it surfaced conversations she wouldn't have encountered otherwise. She watched quietly for a couple of years, absorbing, learning the rhythms of the platform without ever participating. Then the case was filed. And once the public discourse around it started, especially the way people online were talking about sexual harassment, something in her snapped. Not in a dramatic way, but in that slow-burning, loyally frustration that comes from watching a complex issue be flattened into slogans and certainty. She kept seeing video after video confidently describing the case as something it legally was not, and the inaccuracies piled up until it became unbearable. One day, she was sitting in her car outside a gym, waiting for her kid to finish, scrolling like she always did, and she just posted a video recorded in a parked car, no production, no plan, just a need to correct the record. And suddenly, here they were. Over a year later. Still talking about it. Still unraveling it. Lars Harry asks if she remembers the precise moment when it shifted from irritation to action, the exact catalyst that made her say, no, this needs to be addressed. She reflects that it was probably something she sees all the time, both online and offline, the tendency to lump every form of sexual misconduct into a single category. Watching people repeatedly refer to the case as sexual assault, when legally it was being litigated as sexual harassment, crossed a line for her. She explains calmly but firmly that the two are very different in the eyes of the law, with different elements, different standards, different consequences. Having worked on civil sexual harassment cases and having seen criminal sexual assault cases up close, she knew how dangerous that conflation was. Maybe no one would see her video, she thought at the time. Maybe it would go nowhere. But at least she could put one accurate explanation into the world, one voice saying, slow down and look at what this actually is. As it turned out, that voice was needed more than she realized. Lars Harry then pivots to the question everyone wants answered but few ask carefully: what would it actually take, legally, for Justin Baldoni to be held responsible for sexual harassment, and is there any credible case to be made for Blake Lively as things stand right now? He wants both sides, not a verdict, not a hot take. She appreciates the framing and immediately corrects the language, gently but firmly. In the civil system, she explains, we don't talk about guilt or innocence. Those are criminal concepts. Here, the question is liability. And the standard of proof is much lower. Instead of beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the highest standard in the legal system, civil cases operate on a preponderance of the evidence. 50.1%. Just enough to tip the scale. It's a threshold that surprises people when they first hear it, because it feels almost alarmingly low compared to what they're used to seeing on television. For Blake Lively to prevail on a sexual harassment claim, she would need to prove several specific elements: that the conduct was unwelcome, that it was based on sex, that it was severe or pervasive, and that it altered the terms and conditions of her employment. She acknowledges right away that some of these boxes are easier to check than others. Unwelcome conduct is straightforward. If someone says they didn't want it, that element is generally satisfied. But nearly everything else is contested in this case. Whether the conduct was based on sex is unclear, especially given allegations that similar behavior occurred with men. Hugging, for instance, doesn't automatically become sexual harassment simply because it happens between a man and a woman if the same behavior is directed at everyone. Then there's the central issue that dominates most harassment cases: severity or pervasiveness. That analysis is deeply fact-specific, and it's where most cases live or die. Online, people tend to feel extremely certain about how that question should be answered. She is much more cautious. Based on what she has seen, she does not believe there is any single act that would qualify as severe under existing legal standards, a statement that often angers people when she says it publicly. She reminds them, not unkindly, that she didn't write the law. There are countless cases on the books holding that even physically grabbing someone in the workplace does not automatically meet the severity threshold. That doesn't mean it's acceptable behavior. It means the legal bar is high. Pervasiveness, however, is a different argument. A pattern of smaller incidents, taken together, can sometimes meet the standard. A hug here, a comment there, a particular scene that made someone uncomfortable. That's where the work gets done in most cases, and that's where this one would likely be fought, but this case has an additional complication that most employment disputes don't. The question of power. Did Baldoni or Heath actually have the authority to alter Blake Lively's job? In a typical workplace, the answer is obvious. A boss can demote you, fire you, change your assignments, move your desk to a corner. On a film set, the hierarchy is far less clear. Lars Harry jumps in here, pointing out the unusual dynamic of celebrity power, how someone with greater star power can sometimes exert more influence than the nominal authority figures. He notes that from what they've seen, Blake Lively appeared to have significant leverage, even allegedly playing a role in Baldoni being dropped by his agency and being summoned for closed-door meetings. The idea that she was merely a passive employee, standing on her mark and reading lines, doesn't fully align with the footage and documents that have surfaced. She seemed, at times, to be steering the ship. She agrees, and says that this perception was solidified by materials unsealed in recent weeks, particularly a letter Blake Lively wrote to the Producers Guild of America seeking a PGA mark. The letter, she explains, reads like a detailed argument for why Blake effectively functioned as the director of the film. It lays out, over several pages, the creative control she exercised, the decisions she made, the authority she wielded. And notably, she received the mark. From an employment law perspective, the case is a tangle of unresolved issues. Was she an employee or an independent contractor? Was there even a valid employment contract, given that hers was never signed? Each of these questions introduces ambiguity that wouldn't exist in a standard workplace dispute. It's messy, complex, and perfect fodder for a law school exam. Lars Harry reflects on how refreshing it is to speak with someone who approaches the issue through facts rather than allegiance. Online, nuance is often treated as betrayal. If you don't declare a side, people assume you're hiding something. He mentions listening to Blake Lively's voice notes and finding some of the outrage surrounding them misplaced. To him, they sounded like scheduling requests, the kind that can be declined without drama. He compares it to asking to record earlier, being told yes, and moving on. Calling out moments like that as a nothing burgers often leads to accusations that he's compromised or paid off, which he finds absurd. He sees her as the ideal counterbalance, someone who provides information, not entertainment-driven outrage. Even in an environment that rewards extremes, she responds thoughtfully, contrasting the legal profession with the internet. Law, she says, is closer to a meritocracy than people realize. Competence reveals itself over time. Lawyers know who's good and who isn't. Ethical rules and professional norms create a kind of self-sorting system. On the internet, by contrast, credibility is constantly challenged by people who want to measure experience through arbitrary metrics or personal attacks. She can't discuss her active cases, so she has to demonstrate her knowledge indirectly, by explaining principles clearly and accurately. Early on, some viewers accused her of making bad predictions, even though she never claimed to predict outcomes. Lawyers don't do that. What they can do is explain patterns, how similar cases have unfolded hundreds of times before. Overall, she's been pleasantly surprised by the respect she's received online, though there's a persistent group that has disliked her from the beginning and likely always will. They dig, they search, they look for reasons to dismiss her. She's come to accept that she's not for everyone, and that's fine. She uses an analogy about an all-you-can-eat buffet and crab legs she won't touch. Not everything is for everyone. What matters is being clear about who you are, where your boundaries lie, and letting the right audience find you. She's often called a fence-sitter, but she prefers to think of it as treating people fairly, as though she might see them at dinner later. Even Blake Lively, she says, deserves a fair assessment. She empathizes with the difficulty of shooting a film shortly after giving birth and the anxiety that must have come with it. At the same time, she believes Blake overreached, flew too close to the sun. Both things can be true. When Lars Harry asks for her most generous interpretation of Blake's position, she pauses. She's seen a lot in her career. Litigation exposes people at their worst, fighting over deeply personal grievances. What troubles her most here isn't necessarily the underlying facts, but the tactics. The legal maneuvers, the decision to seal evidence for months, the way the case was framed publicly. As a lawyer, she's careful not to tell others how to practice law, but she can say what she would and wouldn't put her name on. Some of what's happened here crosses that line for her. Substantively, she doesn't think Blake's sexual harassment claims are indefensible. People are allowed to express how they felt about workplace interactions. Defamation claims are unlikely for specific legal reasons. But the process choices made along the way have made everything worse, not better, as she contrasts this with the Baldoni side's approach, releasing footage, showing scenes, saying, "This is what happened. Judge it for yourself." Transparency versus opacity. At a recent hearing in New York, she spoke with Wayfair's lawyers, including Kevin Fritz, who confirmed they had been sitting on evidence they were legally prohibited from releasing while it remained sealed. Text messages, communications involving Ryan Reynolds, materials now circulating widely online. They waited because it was the right thing to do. That distinction matters to her. She reiterates that Blake does not have a slam-dunk case, but neither is it dead. No case is truly dead until it's over. There's always an argument to be made. The difficulty is that even a victory would come with collateral damage. The exposure of behind-the-scenes tactics, the perception of attempted cancellation, the rewriting of history without contemporaneous complaints. From the Baldoni camp's perspective, it looks like an attempt to seize control of the film and reshape the narrative after the fact. The absence of real-time messages alleging harassment looms large when Lars Harry asks how damaging credibility issues could be if the case went to trial. She's clear, it would matter enormously. Credibility always matters, but in a sexual harassment case, the plaintiff's testimony is central. She is the primary evidence of whether conduct was unwelcome and how it made her feel. If inconsistencies emerge, if opposing counsel can show behavior that contradicts her claims, that becomes powerful cross-examination material. At trial, everything becomes relevant: interviews, texts, messages to friends, patterns of conduct. None of that has been adjudicated yet. Right now, it's all legal argument and conjecture. They turn to the likelihood of trial. Lars Harry notes that many lawyers once thought the case would never get that far, but every day without settlement moves it closer. When he asks her to put a number on it, she says 30%. Low, especially given how close they are. She explains that Wayfair's pending motions, including motions for judgment on the pleadings and summary judgment, are strong. If granted in part, they could significantly narrow the case. Some claims might disappear entirely. If California civil rights claims or contract claims are dismissed, what remains is a different case altogether, requiring a fresh evaluation of whether it's worth trying. She believes the judge is likely to rule in Wayfair's favor on at least some issues. These motions aren't about weighing evidence but about whether, as a matter of law, certain claims can proceed at all. Judges decide them because juries can't. She doesn't expect Wayfair to win everything, but even partial success would reshape the battlefield. Lars Harry uses a football analogy about letting a play continue to review later, and she laughs, calling it a good metaphor. Some issues, like whether California law applies to conduct in New York and New Jersey, are pure legal questions. Others, like severity or pervasiveness, are often left to juries. This judge, however, has already shown he's willing to make unpopular decisions, as seen in his dismissal of Baldoni's defamation claim. Federal judges, appointed for life, don't have to play it safe. They begin to shift toward the personal side of content creation, with Lars Harry asking what it's been like to suddenly inhabit this world, to go from practicing law to commenting publicly, attending hearings, navigating New York City with a camera pointed at you. She admits it feels strange, especially given her age and her memories of a pre-internet world. She didn't even have email until law school. At first, there was insecurity, a sense of not belonging. But as she watched other creators, she realized the common thread was a willingness to risk embarrassment. Once she leaned into it, everything clicked. Viewers responded not just to the law, but to her as a person, asking about her clothes, her style, her life. She discovered a space that isn't crowded, experts, especially women, who blend serious knowledge with personality. As the conversation moves away from strict legal mechanics and into the lived reality of becoming a public voice, Lars Harry leans in with curiosity that feels personal rather than performative. He admits that he genuinely loves content creation, especially when people with real expertise step into the space and reshape it. He asks her what it has been like to exist in two worlds at once, a respected, practicing lawyer with a law degree and decades of experience, and suddenly this visible presence commenting on a high-profile case, traveling to New York, attending hearings, filming reactions, grabbing coffee at a bodega before heading back into a courthouse where strangers recognize her. He wants to know if it ever feels surreal, if there's a moment where it all hits at once. She doesn't hesitate. It feels strange, she says, and not in a glamorous way. A lot of that, she thinks, comes down to her age and where she sits generationally. She's 50. For the first 23 years of her life, the internet simply didn't exist. She remembers a time before email, before social media, before your thoughts could instantly become public property. She didn't get an email address until law school. So even now, despite having adapted, the internet still feels new to her, slightly unreal. Early on, she admits, there was a bit of an inferiority complex. She wondered whether she belonged in this space at all. But once she started really watching what everyone else was doing, something clicked. It sounds cliché, she says, but it's true. You have to not be afraid of being embarrassed. You have to accept that you might look awkward, that you might not fit neatly into any box, and that you can't wait for permission. She started making content purely about the law, explaining concepts, breaking down motions, clarifying misconceptions. People responded. And then something unexpected happened. Viewers began asking about her clothes, her glasses, where she bought a jacket, whether she could show an outfit. That's when she realized there was an underserved space online, experts, especially women, who didn't have to choose between being authoritative and being human. Most people either made serious educational content or lifestyle content, but rarely both. Once she stopped fighting that and allowed herself to exist as a full person on camera, the anxiety eased. She decided she'd keep doing it for as long as it made sense. Having a full-time career that paid well made that decision easier. Failure wouldn't be catastrophic. There was freedom in that. Lars Harry picks up on something she says and compares it to jazz. You have to know the rules, the structure, the notes, before you can bend them. Her niche is the law. The improvisation is everything else, her style, her tangents, the way she thinks out loud. That's what gives her the freedom to take the content wherever she wants and bring an audience along for the ride. He shifts the conversation toward her podcast, allegedly golden, and says plainly that if she's found success on TikTok, podcasting could be an even better fit. Longer conversations, deeper engagement, a feeling of sitting at the dinner table with listeners rather than shouting into a void. He asks the big question, what would it actually take for her to quit practicing law and go all in on content? She laughs softly because it's something she thinks about often. People ask her if she loves practicing law, and she's honest. Nobody loves it in the way people imagine. It's hard. It's demanding. You can care deeply about it, feel passionate about justice and advocacy, but it's still grinding work. She frames the decision less as a dollar amount and more as a question of time. Right now, between the podcast, Patreon, and social media, she's spending an extra hour or two a day creating. That's manageable. But once it becomes 4 hours or more, she won't be able to do both. At that point, something has to give. Money matters, of course, but she's fortunate. She has a supportive spouse. She's been practicing law for 25 years. She knows she's good at it. In many ways, she's already proven herself in that arena. So she keeps her mind open to the possibility that one day, she might step away. Lars Harry shares his own experience, talking about how shocked his wife was when his channel started taking off, when strangers actually wanted to listen to him. When the money followed, it changed the way she saw it. What once would have taken weeks of driving Uber could suddenly be earned in a day. He asks how her partner has reacted to her success. She explains that at first, he was indifferent in the most benign way. He's a lawyer too. Social media isn't his world. It didn't feel real to him until she moved on to YouTube. One day, he started reading the comments, then walked into the room and said, almost surprised, "People really like listening to you." She joked that people get to listen to her talk for free all day. Over the past few months, though, his support has become vocal. He tells co-workers and even clients to listen to her podcast. That shift has meant a lot. The hardest audience to win over, she admits, has been her 14-year-old son. 14-year-olds think nothing is cool. Nothing. She jokes about trying to convince him she's a cool mom because she has a podcast. The breakthrough came in New York, at the hearing. Listeners showed up at the courthouse and asked to take selfies with her. Her son watched it happen, stunned. "They wanted to take selfies with you?" he asked. That moment landed. Another moment came when someone who followed her content offered them a beachfront Airbnb for free while traveling. She was able to take her spouse and her in-laws on a trip they couldn't have justified otherwise. That, more than money, felt like proof of concept. She suspects that eventually, something similar will click for her son. Maybe free basketball tickets. Maybe a concert. Something that makes him say, "Okay, maybe mom is kind of cool." They talk about a fear many creators have but don't always admit, the worry that if your platform grows, people from your past will emerge, people you don't necessarily want access to your life. Old acquaintances, distant relatives, someone who knew you once and now feels entitled to comment. What she's learned, though, is that fame has changed. It's no longer one global spotlight. It's pockets. Communities. Niches large enough to sustain a career without swallowing your entire life. She's not seeking fame. She doesn't need everyone to know who she is. She didn't realize at first that this was an option, that you could build something meaningful without becoming universally visible. Lars Harry agrees. The internet's love is strange but affirming. He jokes that while he doesn't have to fly private, he's learned not to pick his nose in Starbucks because you never know who's watching. There's a heightened awareness that comes with visibility, a quiet pressure to behave, to remember that you're never fully anonymous anymore. Still, he tells her he sees no ceiling for what she's doing. He doesn't want to take more of her time, but he wants to make sure listeners know about Allegedly Golden, which releases weekly on Tuesdays. He tells her how much he respects her approach, how she's taken the high road in a space flooded with outrage and tribalism, how she stayed true to herself. Those, he says, are the bones you need to survive in this world. She thanks him sincerely and returns the sentiment. She recalls people asking her early on if she knew who Lars Harry was. When she watched his content, she saw someone who served as a kind of moral barometer, a reminder that you don't have to pick a side immediately, that you can let things unfold. You can have ethics, boundaries, and patience. The people meant to stay will stay. She tells him he's taught her a lot. Lars Harry smiles and says content is a long game. Opinions can come later. Let the story play out. Monetize responsibly, sure, but don't rush to judgment. Maybe they'll see each other again if the case actually goes to trial. 30% chance, they joke. Before wrapping up, he notices the painting behind her and comments that it matches his set. She laughs and tells him it's by an Australian artist, affordable, and she'll send him the details. He jokes that she's going to become the artwork queen of LawTube, sent glasses, art, and gifts once people have her address. She groans playfully at the thought. They exchange final thanks. He invites her back anytime. She expresses genuine appreciation and signs off. And with that, the Coravanta conversation closes, not with certainty, but with clarity about the law, about integrity, about what it means to speak carefully in a loud world, and about the quiet confidence it takes to let your work, not your volume, define you.